Hello, how y'all doing out there? How you guys doing? Well, I hope you're doing well. Probably have to go to a dental appointment today, and yeah, at least the weather's gonna be good here in Ohio. Um, I'm going to show you a video, but anyway, long story short, I'm gonna get to a video that shows you what's gonna be happening and why is a part of American history, of Black Americans' history, and why they stress on stuff like this. And I made a previous video about reparations, spiritual reparations. I think somebody saw the video and got offended. That was probably a subscriber and got offended. But you gotta tell what the consequences is. If you're scared of the truth, you're scared of the truth. Sometimes you may not agree, but reality is history and truth is truth. But anyway, I'm going to show you this video, and I'll get back with my commentary. I got a couple videos on this.
Will Vivek Ramaswamy win the governorship of Ohio in November 2026? Biden yes for 55.
An executive order has just been signed by Trump. One that could erase everything you thought you knew about America's past. The chains, the blood, the buried truth. No headlines, no outrage, just silence and a pen.
Another bold move by President Trump, this time taking aim at the Smithsonian Institution.
But why would a former president want museums to forget that? Let's find out. It didn't start with a press conference. There were no reporters in the room, no cheering crowds, no American flags waving on stage. Just a desk, a signature, and a smile. That's how the order entered history. Quiet. But what set it in motion may be the loudest rewriting of American memory in decades. The document is titled, Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. A name so vague, so dressed in decency, you would almost miss the violence it contains. But behind its calm exterior is a blueprint, not for unity, but for erasure. It begins with a list: museums, archives, public institutions, cultural spaces where America's darkest truths live, slavery, segregation, massacres, stolen lands. The order doesn't name them directly, but everyone knows which ones it means. The places that make you uncomfortable, the places where school trips turn silent, the places where history refuses to smile. Buried in the third paragraph, the real aim appears: to remove divisive narratives that undermine national cohesion. It doesn't say racism, it doesn't say injustice, but it doesn't need to. Because when you target the narratives that cause discomfort, you're targeting the voices that were never comfortable to begin with. This isn't a new debate, but it's the first time it's come with federal enforcement. Under the new order, all institutions receiving government funds must undergo an ideological review. A team handpicked by the administration will examine every exhibit, every educational program, and every historical quote etched in stone or printed on paper. Their job? Identify content that portrays America as oppressive, unjust, or structurally unequal. Not wrong, not factually inaccurate, just divisive. And that's the loophole. That's the poison. Because once truth becomes optional, once historical pain is seen as a problem rather than a lesson, then memory itself is on a leash. The team leading this review isn't made of historians, not scholars, not educators. It's made of political allies, cultural critics, and ideologues. People who don't ask, is this true? They ask, does this make us look bad? And if the answer is yes, they recommend removal. Museums will be allowed to keep content that celebrates national progress, highlights American innovation, and supports cultural pride. But anything that drags the eye backward toward injustice, inequality, genocide, will be marked as a threat to public unity. Not offensive, not false, just inconvenient. And inconvenient history, under this new doctrine, has no place in the National Museum system. The order doesn't ban slavery exhibits. It doesn't outlaw mentioning Jim Crow. It doesn't say you can't speak of native boarding schools or redlining or lynchings. No, it's smarter than that. It simply starves them. Any museum that continues to feature such divisive themes risks losing all federal support. No funding, no grants, no partnerships, no protection. In short, history stays, but only if you can afford to tell it without the government's help, and most can. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Smaller institutions are the most vulnerable. Local African American heritage centers, indigenous archives, LGBTQ+ memory projects, they run on shoestring. Compliance. And the question we now face isn't whether this is dangerous. The real question is, how are people reacting? It started with hesitation.
Best and worst treats for your dog. Here are the best and worst foods for your dog. Number 1, cheese. Dogs go crazy for cheese.
Not protest, not defiant. Just a brief pause in the halls of America's museums, like the moment after a storm siren, when everything goes still and no one's quite sure if the danger has passed or is just beginning. Within days of the order, inboxes lit up. Subject lines like urgent review required, compliance update, and content audit request. They weren't laws, not yet. They weren't demands, just guidance. But everyone knew what they meant. Change the story or risk everything. Boards of directors held emergency meetings. Communications teams scrubbed websites. Exhibit designers opened old files, looking at paragraphs they once wrote with pride. Paragraphs that now felt radioactive. Across the country, curators found themselves asking a question they never imagined they would face in America. Can we still say this? In a museum world once governed by historical accuracy, nuance, and truth-telling, the new era introduced a different metric: risk tolerance. Not, is this true, but will this get us flagged? The stakes weren't theoretical. Museums that defied the tone of the order began receiving phone calls. No threats, no legal letters, just check-ins. Just reminders that funding was being reviewed. Just enough to make sure the message was received. And slowly, changes began. A Black History Center in Georgia removed a segment on mass incarceration. A Native Cultural Museum in Arizona pulled its exhibit on boarding schools for reframing. A major city museum put its civil rights wing under maintenance with no timeline for return. None of these decisions were publicly linked to the order, but behind closed doors, staff whispered the same word: pressure. Because the pressure wasn't loud. It was quiet, administrative, chilling. This wasn't the first of censorship. It was the breath on your neck. In interviews later given off the record, several museum directors admitted they didn't even know what the new boundaries were. That was the point. The order was vague by design. Without a clear rulebook, uncertainty became the weapon. Institutions began censoring themselves, not because they were forced to, but because they were afraid not to. And that's how silence spreads. One museum removes a single plaque. Another changes the wording of a slavery exhibit. Another shortens its section on police violence. Each act is small, even justifiable on the surface. Budget, space, priorities. But together they create a new version of the national memory. Cleaner, simpler, less painful, less real. The fear wasn't only institutional, it seeped into individuals. Museum educators, those who give tours to children, families, and students, began rewriting their scripts. Words like oppression were softened. Phrases like white supremacy were swapped for racial dynamics. Some educators were told to let visitors ask first before addressing hard topics. In the Smithsonian Network, once known for its unapologetic truth-telling, a new tension brewed. Some staff wanted to speak out. Others warned against it. Meetings became hushed. Messaging became sanitized. The very places built to preserve difficult truth were now being trained to fear it. And for many, the moment that confirmed the shift wasn't a press release or exhibit closure. It was the sudden disappearance of the diversity, equity, and inclusion offices. These offices weren't just symbolic, they were structural. They represented a commitment to telling America's full story, to hire diverse voices, to address gaps in representation. In the wake of the executive order, several DEI offices were quietly disbanded, not with rage, but with resignation. Staff were reassigned, budgets were frozen, initiatives were put on hold indefinitely. It was a clean, bloodless purge, and it didn't make headlines. That's the thing. There was no national outcry, no massive protest movement, no primetime coverage. The museums didn't shut down. They didn't burn books or cancel tours. On the surface, everything looked normal. Field trips still came. Guides still spoke. People still walked through galleries, nodding in thought. But the content had changed. The tone had shifted. The air had thickened. The real damage wasn't in what was said. It was in what was now unsayable. And in that vacuum, something darker began to grow. Right-wing commentators, once fringe critics of woke history, began celebrating the order as a turning point. Culture war pundits took credit for the cleansing of liberal bias in historical institutions. Conservative PACs began sending out fundraising emails declaring victory over Marxist museums. And slowly, new proposals began circulating. National standards for historical exhibits, new review boards for federally funded education programs, and even legislation that would penalize anti-American content. The executive order, it turned out, was only step one. What started as an invisible directive had opened a door, and now ideologues were lining up to walk through it. And the institutions meant to hold the line, they were already folding under the weight of silence. So now the question is what this means for Black people. When a government rewrites its history books, the first thing that disappears isn't a date, it's a people. For Black Americans, this order isn't abstract. It's not a policy debate or a culture war headline. It's personal. It's ancestral. It's an erasure with fingerprints. And those fingerprints are fresh. Because when slavery is downplayed, it's not just a historical fact being buried. It's generations of trauma being denied. And when museums are stripped of the truth, Black families lose something deeper than documentation. They lose evidence, recognition, legitimacy, acknowledgement that what happened to them wasn't just real, it mattered. The African American experience in the United States has always been a fight to be seen. From plantation fields to protest lines, every chapter has been a demand for visibility. So what happens when the highest office in the country signs an order that makes visibility a threat? You don't just disappear from the museum wall. You start to disappear from the national conscience. Under this order, the history of slavery is a...
Our members are typically conservative investors.
Well, they can do that, but one day everything will be revealed because God will show. Just like in times past, we are finding out. But they can't erase everything. You know why? Watch this.
From the 3-light traffic signal, refrigerated trucks, automatic elevator doors, color monitors for desktop computers, to the shape of the modern ironing board, the clothes wringer, blood banks, laser treatment for cataracts, home security systems, and the Super Soaker children's toy, many objects and services Americans use every day were invented by Black men and women, despite the cruel segregation and racism which dominated their time. Some of these innovators were recognized for their inventions, but countless other inventors of color have gone largely unrecognized. Others, completely lost to history. There were some instances where black inventors would compete with Alexander Graham Bell, with Thomas Edison, and their inventions will turn out incredibly good, and sometimes even more transformative. But they just did not have access to the capital. Neither were they granted the same access to all the different systems that the United States puts in place to support white inventors. In this video, we will be discussing, amongst many others, 50 black inventors and their inventions that changed the world. 1. Thomas L. Jennings. During a time in American history when the vast majority of black people were slaves and owned as properties, luckily Thomas L. Jennings was born to a free black family in New York City. This awarded him the opportunity to learn a trade as a tailor and eventually operate his own tailoring business. Jennings was dissatisfied with the traditional methods of cleaning clothing, which gave him the impetus to experiment with new techniques. In the process, he had ended up inventing a dry scouring method, a precursor to modern dry cleaning. His dry scouring allowed clothing to get clean without damage from water soaking through the fibers. In 1821, Jennings was granted a patent for his new cleaning method, making him most likely the first black individual in the U.S. to receive a patent. Jennings established his own tailor and dry cleaning business, and gained a reputation as a respected local community member. Using the proceeds from his business, Jennings had joined in the fight for the abolition of slavery. He had as well purchased the freedom of his wife, Elizabeth, who at the time was an indentured servant, and that of his children. 2. Judy Reed.
Attention growth hackers and hustlers. Would it be a bad idea if we paid for your marketing? That means you would get unlimited email and SMS marketing for free. That's right, free. As in, why are we even doing this free? Here's where it gets borderline ridiculous. Our automated marketing software does all the heavy lifting for you. New leads, instantly added to your CRM. Follow-ups, handled. Email and SMS outreach, automatic. You, sipping coffee and walking.
Hold on 1 minute, I got a weak stand on this this device, and I hate when this happens.
If you want to avoid being scammed in Rio de Janeiro or
processing of postal fees. 11. Lewis Latimer. Born in 1848 to formerly enslaved parents, Lewis Latimer was fortunate enough to land a job at a patent law firm after the Civil War, where he fought on the Union side. At the firm, he provided valuable invention design, helped as a draftsman whose drawings of machinery, mechanisms, and various inventions determined whether any patent application would be approved or denied. A skillful draftsman of his time, Latimer was employed by Alexander Graham Bell to draw the draft for the telephone design, for which Bell received the patent in 1876. While working as a draftsman and assistant manager for the U.S. Electric Lighting Company, he improved the process of making carbon filament for light bulbs, so that it might last longer and be cheaper to produce. The filament was even more effective than Edison's design, and in 1884, he was invited to work with Thomas Edison himself. He was the first person of color to be included in the exclusive Edison Pioneers organization. Latimer also invented a precursor to the modern air conditioner known as an apparatus for cooling and disinfecting, locking umbrellas, improved train bathroom design, a lamp fixture, and a device called book supporter. 12. Jan Ernst Matzeliger. Jan Ernst Matzeliger spent a considerable amount of time creating numerous prototype designs until he succeeded in building his first shoe-lasting machine. This machine was designed to make the leather uppers fit flawlessly with the mold, ultimately revolutionizing the shoemaking industry.
The revolution is finally here, a technological revolution that is transforming our world. Because while the mainstream media is caught up in all the hype around
efficiency drastically improved, increasing production output from 50 pairs a day by hand to anywhere between 150 and 700 pairs daily. Introducing easier manufacturing processes and larger production quantities led to a 50% reduction in shoe prices nationwide. Additionally, Matzeliger is credited with inventing the nailing machine. 13. George Washington Murray. George Washington Murray's inventions were all born from his experience as a farmer and his determination to make labor less arduous. Having been born into slavery, Murray grew up on a Rember cotton plantation until the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. His first 3 patents, a furrow opener, a marker, and a stalk knocker cultivator, were granted in April 1984. 2 months later, the U.S. Patent Office awarded him 4 more patents, including for cotton chopper and fertilizer distributor devices. Murray was also distantly related to Jim Clyburn, a U.S. House of Representatives member from South Carolina. 14. John Parker. John Parker was a conductor in the Underground Railroad network and an American abolitionist who dedicated his life to freeing over 1,000 enslaved individuals. In addition to his heroic efforts, Parker was also a successful businessman and inventor. He is credited with the early designs of the tobacco press and harrow, for which he received patents in 1884 and 1885. Moreover, Parker established the Phoenix Foundry in 1890, the largest between Cincinnati and Portsmouth. Parker's contributions to society were not limited to his activism. He also became one of only 55 Americans to be awarded multiple U.S. patents by 1900. 15. Norbert Rillieux. Norbert Rillieu's father was the owner of a vast sugar plantation. After studying in Paris, Rillieux returned to the United States and began inventing sugar production devices, focusing on the evaporating process. His first patented invention was a vacuum evaporator for the refining process, which produced whiter and more refined sugar. Over time, this invention was widely used in other industries, including whiskey, gelatin, condensed milk, glue, and soap. 16. Samuel Scottron. Samuel Scottron, the inventor of the dual adjustable mirror on a pole commonly seen in traditional barbershops, named his invention the Scottron mirror. This mirror is positioned so clients can observe their haircut from every angle. Scottron patented this practical invention in 1868. Following his success in the barbershop industry, Scottron created several commonplace household items, including curtain rods, adjustable window cornices, a pole tip, and a supporting bracket. He spent approximately 15 years traveling between the United States and Canada to sell these products. In addition to his successful career in inventing, Scottron was also a co-founder of the Cuban Anti-Slavery Society. 17. Lewis Temple. Lewis Temple, a highly skilled blacksmith, is credited with inventing an improved harpoon that revolutionized whaling in 1845. Unlike conventional harpoons, Temple's harpoon resembled a fishhook in shape. Once the hook penetrated the whale, it would latch onto the flesh, making it exceedingly difficult for the animal to escape. This improved design, called Temple's iron, became the standard harpoon in the whaling industry throughout the 19th century. Despite his invention's success, Lewis Temple was not a whaler himself. 18. Sarah Breedlove Walker. Sarah Breedlove Walker, popularly known as Madam C.J. Walker, is arguably the most well-known African-American woman inventor. She revolutionized hair care by designing the first hot comb and inventing the idea of pomade. Before the hot comb, most African-American women straightened their hair with clothing irons, resulting in scalp and facial burns and damaged hair. Walker sold her inventions and helped transform the marketing strategy for cosmetic products. She established a large group of saleswomen known as the Walker Clubs, a system later adopted by Mary Kay. In 1908, Walker founded Lelia College in Pittsburgh to teach women how to sell cosmetic products. Her innovative marketing tactics made her the first African-American woman millionaire in the United States. Despite her wealth, Walker remained philanthropic and contributed significantly to various nonprofit groups, including the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Persons, NAACP. She even funded a scholarship to help women enroll in college-level education. 19. Granville T. Woods. Granville T. Woods was awarded the patent for the steam boiler in 1884. Leveraging the communication technology of the late 1800s, he invented an apparatus that combined the functions of the telephone and the telegraph, called telegraphony. This groundbreaking system allowed telegraph stations to send both voice and text messages over the same line. Alexander Graham Bell's company, a white company located in Massachusetts, USA, later purchased the technology's patent. Woods also invented the synchronous multiplex railway telegraph, a communication system that enabled railroad workers to determine the precise locations of trains on any given railway. This technology not only improved scheduling, but also helped prevent railway accidents. Throughout his life, Woods received over 50 patents in various industries. Between 1900 and 1907, he was granted 20 patents for electronic devices that controlled trains. His numerous inventions earned him the nickname, the Black Edison. 20. Elijah McCoy. Elijah McCoy never had to endure life in slavery thanks to the Underground Railroad, which helped his parents escape to Canada after being enslaved. At 15, McCoy enrolled in a boarding school in Edinburgh, Scotland, to study mechanical engineering. Despite his education, McCoy
I always find it a little amusing when people assume I work out for hours on end every single day.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen,
Even when they hurt us after Jesus is resurrected.
I want to show you something. The reason why people like Donald Trump don't want you to know this. Did you know that there was a slave Bible that black people under churches had to teach this? Hold on.
On the next to the last Sunday of the church year would be appropriate. The Lord be with you. Blessed Lord, who caused all.
Hold on. Check out that right quick. They controlled everything.
Inside Washington's Museum of the Bible, a single volume that is like no other. The so-called Slave Bible. Remarkable not for what's in it, but for what's not.
So about 90% of the Old Testament's been removed and about 50% of the New Testament's been removed. To put it another way, a normal King James Version has 1,189 chapters in it. The Slave Bible has only 232.
Missing are chapters and verses that might have encouraged uprisings. Book of Exodus, redacted. No story of Moses demanding Pharaoh, let my people go. Gone is Galatians, and the verse, there is neither bond nor free, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus. And no Jeremiah, woe unto him that useth his neighbor's service without wages.
What they've left in are verses such as Ephesians 6:5, which is the famous verse, slaves, be obedient to your master.
Looking at this Bible, it's hard to tell that anything's been taken out of it.
That's correct. I mean, it looks like a normal book. For many enslaved Africans, this would have been the first time they were exposed to the Bible.
A Bible selectively edited to instill obedience, using religion to underpin the horror of slavery. When people encounter this exhibit, what lasting impression do you want them to leave with?
But we want to pass the message on that may this never happen again. The Bible itself is a whole book. It's not one that you get to carve up and use this piece or that piece.
The Slave Bible designed to repress rebellion, but it didn't work. Enslaved people in the Caribbean constantly fought against slavery until emancipation.
I think it's very relevant to understand our history. Not just American history, but our African American history, our roots, and how we got to this point.
A dark chapter in the history of the good book. Jeff Bennett, NBC News, Washington.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on it.
Sounds familiar, don't it? So so why I'm making this, because the past always come into the present. That's why I put this in there, because what the administration done is the same thing that they did the people that were the overseers in the 1800s, and they would, during the time of slavery, and they would have to go into the descendants of the transatlantic slaves at the time, black people, into the churches to see what they were teaching and how they and oversee and report back to the master, the master of the property, the master of who they are, of what was said in their sermon in church. And this is one of the things that was taught. And you don't believe me? The same guy wrote right there.
In 2018, at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., was a special exhibit centered on a rare Bible from the 1880s that was used by British missionaries to convert and educate slaves. What's notable about this Bible is not just its rarity, but its content, or rather the lack of content. It excludes any portion of text that might inspire rebellion or liberation. This was the Slave Bible, the Holy Scriptures, the Word of God as at the time, meant to guide us through our lives on earth. The Slave Bible was different from the Bible we know today. It was used as a tool for propaganda, supported by ministers who claimed to speak for God. It might surprise you to learn that some who preached love and holiness believed that God had cursed a certain race because of the color of their skin. But what exactly did the Slave Bible contain? Which passages were promoted and which ones were left out? And the most significant question of all, why did it even exist? In this video, we will answer all your questions and shine a light on a time when religion was used to spread falsehoods and hatred. Before we get right into the video, please smash the like button and subscribe to the channel to keep informed of our eye-opening black narrative. Prior to their abduction and enslavement, Africans were not monolithic in their religious beliefs. Rather, they practiced a rich tapestry of spiritual traditions that varied across regions, ethnic groups, and cultures. These traditions included animism, ancestor worship, and polytheism, all of which were deeply connected to the natural world and the spirits inhabiting it. Additionally, many Africans had embraced Islam through contact with Arab traders and travelers. This introduction to Islam resulted in the conversion of various African communities to the faith. Thus, when Africans were uprooted from their homelands, they brought with them a diverse array of spiritual beliefs and practices. Upon their arrival in the New World, enslaved Africans were confronted with a starkly different religious landscape, one dominated by Christianity. Missionaries and slave owners sought to convert enslaved individuals to Christianity as part of their efforts to assert control and justify the institution of slavery. The promise of salvation, eternal life, and spiritual salvation was used as both a carrot and a stick. Conversion could offer some semblance of hope and comfort in the face of unimaginable suffering, while simultaneously serving as a means of asserting authority over the enslaved. Africans were brought to Christian congregations where they were exposed to the teachings and rituals of the faith. This exposure marked the beginning of a spiritual transformation that would unfold over generations. As African individuals became members of Christian congregations, their traditional religious practices began to merge with elements of Christianity. It was in this context of spiritual upheaval and vulnerability that the Slave Bible emerged. The Slave Bible, produced in the early 19th century, was a carefully edited and censored version of the Bible, with significant portions omitted. While the Bible is traditionally seen as a source of inspiration, liberation, and moral guidance, this manipulated version sought to erase passages that might challenge the status quo or inspire thoughts of rebellion and emancipation. Today, there are only 3 known copies of the Slave Bible in existence. One copy belongs to Fisk University, and the other 2 are located in the United Kingdom. The original Slave Bible was published by Law and Gilbert Publishing House in London, and the copy belonging to Fisk University was published the following year. It was published on behalf of the Society for the Conversion of Negro Slaves to educate enslaved Africans and preserve the system of slavery. The first Slave Bible was published in 1807, 3 years after the Haitian Revolution ended. That revolution was the only slave revolt in history in which enslaved people successfully drove out their European oppressors to form a new nation, and it increased American and European paranoia that the people they oppressed would one day rise up against them. The Haitian Revolution could have been a motivation for publishing a Bible without the part where Moses tells the Pharaoh to "let my people go." Missionaries and planters may have thought that Christianity, at least certain parts of it, would protect against revolutions by teaching enslaved people to respect their masters. Slaveholders and colonial authorities recognized the potential threat posed by a literate enslaved population. They feared that if Africans had access to the complete Bible, they might find inspiration for resistance, liberation, and equality within its pages. To ensure this doesn't happen, certain passages within the context of the Slave Bible were meticulously selected to promote the idea of submission and obedience among the enslaved population. These passages were wielded as powerful tools to reinforce the notion that servitude was not only a worldly duty, but also a divine mandate. One of such was the curse of Ham in the book of Genesis in the words of the King James Bible, which was the version then current. These were, first, Genesis 9:18-27. And the sons of Noah that went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the 3 sons of Noah, and of them was the whole world overspread. And Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his 2 brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it upon both their shoulders, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done unto him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. While the biblical account itself raises questions and challenges, it was the distorted and popularized version known as the Curse of Ham that became a foundational text for those seeking to justify the enslavement of Africans on purportedly biblical grounds. The original story mentions that Canaan, the son of Ham, would bear the curse. However, in the Curse of Ham, Canaan's name is omitted. This omission allowed for a broader application of the curse to all of Ham's descendants. Ham was portrayed as black in the Curse of Ham. This portrayal was a misinterpretation of the biblical text, which provided no description of Ham's physical appearance. This false characterization was used to associate Ham and his descendants with Africans. Building on the false portrayal of Ham, his descendants were broadly identified as Africans. This identification, devoid of any biblical basis, was used to justify the enslavement of African people. The Curse of Ham was utilized to argue that God had ordained the enslavement of Africans as punishment for Ham's supposed sin of seeing his father's nakedness. This distorted interpretation provided a religious justification for the brutal practice of slavery. The Curse of Ham found a receptive audience among those seeking to rationalize the enslavement of African individuals. Proponents of slavery, particularly in the American context, wielded this misinterpretation as a powerful tool to perpetuate their agenda. It was disseminated through literature, sermons, and other means, infiltrating the collective consciousness of societies. The consequences of this distorted narrative were profound and devastating. It contributed to the dehumanization of African people and the establishment of systems of racial hierarchy. African individuals were viewed as cursed by divine decree, perpetuating their status as chattel and justifying the horrific abuses inflicted upon them. In addition to this, there are other passages used to enforce slavery and encourage obedience. Some of these include Ephesians 6:5, which says, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ." This verse from the New Testament is perhaps one of the most frequently cited passages in the Slave Bible to encourage obedience. The verse implies that obedience to earthly masters is akin to serving Christ himself. This interpretation elevated servitude to a sacred duty, fostering the belief that compliance with enslavers was not merely a matter of social order, but also a religious obligation. Enslaved Africans were taught that by serving their masters diligently and sincerely, they were not only fulfilling their earthly duties, but also earning favor in the eyes of God. This deeply ingrained spiritual coercion had a profound impact on their psyche. It left them torn between the desire for spiritual redemption and the yearning for earthly freedom. Another verse is Colossians 3:22, which says, "Slaves, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service, as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord." This is another passage from the New Testament, reinforced the theme of unwavering obedience. It admonished enslaved individuals to obey their masters in all matters, not merely when under close scrutiny or to please others. Instead, they were urged to carry out their servitude with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. The interpretation of this passage emphasized that even in the absence of direct supervision, enslaved individuals were to remain steadfast in their obedience. The fear of the Lord was invoked to underscore the gravity of this command, further deepening the sense of spiritual duty. Slaveholders recognized the power of religion in shaping the beliefs and actions of enslaved Africans. By emphasizing these passages, they aimed to legitimize their oppressive system and dissuade any thoughts of rebellion or resistance. The message was clear. Obedience was not only expected but divinely mandated, a message carefully curated to maintain control over those in bondage. These carefully selected passages played a pivotal role in shaping the psychological landscape of enslaved Africans. The constant exposure to such teachings instilled a complex web of emotions and beliefs. On one hand, they grappled with the desire to attain spiritual salvation and please a divine entity. On the other hand, they faced the harsh reality of subjugation and the yearning for personal freedom. The dichotomy between their spiritual obligations and their human aspirations left many enslaved individuals in a state of inner turmoil. They found themselves torn between their duties as defined by the Slave Bible and their innate longing for autonomy and equality. In the troubling history of the Slave Bible, the promotion and distribution of this modified text were not limited to enslavers alone. Rather, it saw the involvement of various religious figures, including bishops, pastors, and missionaries who, perhaps paradoxically, lent their support to this distorted version of the Holy Scriptures. Among these figures, Reverend C.F. Morgan, a prominent Anglican bishop in Jamaica, stood out as a key advocate for the Slave Bible. To comprehend the scope of his endorsement and that of other religious leaders, we must delve into the complex motivations and justifications behind their actions. The Anglican bishop, Reverend C.F. Morgan, played a pivotal role in the dissemination of the Slave Bible, particularly in the context of Jamaica. His endorsement of this modified scripture raised important questions about the intersections of faith, power, and social control during the era of slavery. Morgan's support for the Slave Bible was rooted in his belief that it served as a tool for maintaining social order and control among the enslaved population. To comprehend his perspective, we must consider the broader context in which he operated. During the period of slavery, religion was often employed both as a means of subjugation and as a source of hope and resistance. Enslaved individuals were exposed to Christian teachings, but the interpretation of these teachings varied widely. On one hand, there were religious leaders like Morgan who espoused a view of Christianity that reinforced existing power structures. They saw the modified Bible as a way to legitimize the institution of slavery, emphasizing obedience, submission, and servitude as religious duties. In their eyes, this interpretation not only maintained social order, but also provided a spiritual rationale for the oppressive system. Morgan's support for the Slave Bible underscores the power dynamics at play during this tumultuous period. As a religious authority figure, his words held immense sway over the enslaved population. By endorsing this distorted text, he effectively reinforced the existing hierarchy, with enslavers at the top and the enslaved at the bottom. The use of religion to justify slavery was not unique to Morgan or the Anglican Church. Across denominations, there were individuals who used their religious authority to endorse and perpetuate the institution of slavery. Most of these individuals focused on the curse of Ham and supported the interpretation, and often used it to legitimize the enslavement of Africans and to reinforce racial hierarchies.
And do you know one of the groups of people that they mentioned about that in America was the Mormons? They went on this doctrine. And I can show you that. This is why black people feel the way they do about Christianity. This is the reason why, because of what was done in the past. And what we see what Donald Trump doing in the present,
provided religious justifications for the enslavement of black Africans and contributed to the deeply entrenched system of slavery in the country. The Slave Bible didn't only focus on passages that enforced obedience, suppressed rebellion, and ensured the continued subjugation of enslaved African populations, but it also deliberately omitted several passages to prevent the inspiration of freedom, equality, and justice among the oppressed. One of the most glaring omissions from the Slave Bible was the book of Exodus. This deliberate exclusion was far from accidental. It was a calculated strategy aimed at erasing a story that embodied the pursuit of freedom and the triumph of justice. In Exodus, the narrative unfolds as the Israelites enslaved in Egypt seek liberation under the guidance of Moses. Their journey from bondage to freedom, marked by miraculous events and divine intervention, has resonated with oppressed people throughout history. The removal of Exodus from the Slave Bible was strategic because it contained powerful themes that could have inspired enslaved Africans to aspire to their own emancipation. The story of God's justice, his intervention on behalf of the oppressed, and the ultimate escape from tyranny was a narrative that slaveholders feared would embolden those in bondage. The omission of Exodus effectively deprived enslaved Africans of a tale that could have fueled their desire for liberation. Within the complete Bible, there are verses that emphasize freedom, justice, and the call to resist oppression. These verses were anathema to slaveholders, as they posed a direct challenge to the institution of slavery. Galatians 3:28, for instance, proclaims, "There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." This powerful message of equality among believers directly contradicted the racial hierarchy and the legitimacy of slavery, Slave Bible doesn't include Moses leading the Israelites to freedom, but it does include Joseph's enslavement in Egypt. In the U.S., some sermons aimed at enslaved people portrayed Joseph as someone who accepts his lot in life, keeps his faith in God, and in the end is rewarded for it. The Slave Bible may have wanted to impart a similar lesson to its audience. In the Slave Bible, such verses were ruthlessly excluded to prevent any suggestion of equality among enslaved individuals. The deliberate omission of these passages aimed to maintain a rigid hierarchy where slaveholders could justify their dominance and argue that divine approval lay with the institution of slavery. By silencing these messages of freedom and equality, the oppressors sought to maintain control over the minds and spirits of the enslaved. The Slave Bible stands as a reminder of how religion can be twisted and manipulated to justify cruelty and oppression. Ministers and pastors.
I'm going to cut this short right here. So now you see that the past, what they've done in the past is in the present. What Donald Trump is doing as a president and his administration have done, he did it just like his forefathers have done. They doing that to this day with the so-called DEI, because they don't want to take accountability, and they know that's part of in the museum. They want to shut that down, and they want to put their narrative, just like this commentator says. That's what it was really all about. And there are black people that are still spiritually under the generational curse of what this taskmaster that's done when it comes to Christianity and it comes to the different things up under Christianity. There are still black churches still to this day that the slave master, how do they use it? They use it because if you teach a sermon, you're going to lose your tax status. You teach a sermon, it can be a violation. Nothing's new up under the sun. This is the reason why some black people have walked away from the church when it comes to black people. And they went out and gone, really, some have gone to this direction because of what was said. And that's why it must be by the Spirit of God to bring those black people that dismissed all that what was taught, because this was generational. From the time this happened all the way to now, there are black pastors that carrying on the same tradition like they did from their white overseers. And this is the same thing. You have black conservatives who agree with the overseer like Donald Trump. This is one of the things he don't want in the institutions. He don't want the history. And you see how the way, and this just goes to show you, they want to erase that part of the past and say that your generational, what you've been through as a generational, your pain is under a Simon Says. I got to determine as the overseer what your pain is. I got to determine if it offends me as your overseer. I have to determine based on it makes me feel uncomfortable. That's where the old Simon Says when it comes to different races of people in America. Simon Says, move here, do this, do this. You don't do this, is the consequences. This is the reason why. And I will not, if it means offending somebody to tell the truth, I'm going to tell the truth, stand on it. Because in order to correct the problems of the past, to make it righteous of the present, you must address this. You got to address these things. And it doesn't matter what political party you play on, the Democrats or the Republicans. It doesn't matter what your political affiliation was. Even back then, when the slaves got and start voting into politics, it didn't matter. Even though they started out being Republicans, but did you notice the history that the old Republicans is turning to the Democrats? Now you see nothing's new up under sun. Two winged birds of the same stone. two wings on the same bird. This is why we say this, and people have to understand this. This is the reason why. And so tell a group of people, the indigenous people, any other people, your history doesn't matter, because Simon says under Donald Trump, it offends me, and we don't want to protect it. But like every other generation, go back to the geology, the people that dig up the stuff out of the ground, they still find out things that was covered up. You can't cover something up. You can't scrape it out, because somewhere along the line, somebody 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 32, maybe 100 years, however long the earth will be on this axle, God will make sure, and it's nothing Trump and his administration can never do to stop what was done. So you can't stop something when truth is being revealed in the planet. The earth will cop up what's righteous and justice, and all the unspilled, unjust justices that was in this land, just as well as in the Caribbean and other places. So hopefully this will be a lesson for some people. They can do what they want, but you can never. But you see that even certain things, even to the descendants of the transatlantic slave to this generation, they still up under oppressive system. There are people still getting unjustly undeleted. There are still what they call lynch right now. They can still put you in prison and bound you and put you in prison slavery. It's past is coming to present. Was done, and that's what they did in the Bible. That's what Trump and his administration is doing to people today. Think about it. All right, then, ladies and gentlemen, here's another segment of history, how it's connection from the past to the present under the current administration. Take care, be blessed. See you on the next video.